Sarah Martinez pushed through the glass door of Brew Haven Coffee Shop at exactly 9:30 in the morning, just like she had done every day for the past 6 months. The familiar smell of freshly ground coffee beans and warm pastries wrapped around her like a comfortable blanket. She loved this place more than anywhere else in the small college town. It was her safe space where she could think and work without anyone bothering her. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, creating dancing shadows on the wooden floor. Sarah walked slowly toward her favorite corner table near the back of the shop. She always sat in the same spot, because it gave her a perfect view of the entire room while keeping her back protected against the wall. Old habits died hard, and she still felt more comfortable when she could see everyone around her. Sarah wore a simple black tank top that showed off her left shoulder and upper arm. Covering that area was an intricate tattoo that meant everything to her. The design was beautiful and complex, showing a majestic eagle soaring high above rolling ocean waves. Military insignia were carefully woven throughout the artwork, creating a story that only certain people would understand. The colors were rich and vibrant, with deep blues for the water and golden browns for the eagle. Every line had been placed with purpose and meaning. She pulled out her laptop and opened it on the small round table. Sarah was working on her graduate thesis about trauma counseling and helping veterans adjust to life after military service. The research was challenging but important to her. She wanted to help people who had experienced things that most civilians could never understand. Her own experiences had taught her that healing took time and required the right kind of support. 3 college students sat at the table directly next to hers. They looked young, probably around 19 or 20 years old. The first boy had messy brown hair and wore an expensive-looking hoodie with designer jeans. The second student was shorter with blonde hair and kept checking his phone every few seconds. The third member of their group was a girl with long red hair who seemed more interested in taking selfies than paying attention to her friends. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but she noticed the 3 students kept glancing in her direction. At first she thought maybe they recognized her from somewhere, or perhaps they were just curious about what she was working on. College students were often interested in graduate research, especially when it involved psychology and counseling. But their glances turned into stares and their whispers grew louder. Sarah could feel their eyes on her tattoo, and she began to feel uncomfortable. She had dealt with this kind of attention before, but it never got easier. Some people loved military tattoos, while others had strong negative opinions about them. She hoped these students would lose interest and go back to their own conversations. The boy in the expensive hoodie leaned forward and whispered something to his friends that made them all laugh. Sarah caught a few words that made her stomach tighten with anxiety. They were talking about her tattoo, and their comments were not kind or respectful. She tried to block out their voices and concentrate on her thesis, but their whispers seemed to get louder with each passing minute. Sarah had worked hard to build a peaceful routine in this coffee shop. She came here every morning to write and remember the good times in her life. The atmosphere usually helped her feel calm and focused. The baristas knew her order by heart and always smiled when she walked in. Regular customers had become familiar faces who nodded hello when they saw her. This place had become her sanctuary in a world that sometimes felt harsh and judgmental. The tattoo on her arm had taken 12 hours over 3 sessions to complete. Every single detail had been discussed with the artist to make sure it captured exactly what Sarah wanted to express. The eagle represented strength and freedom, while the waves symbolized the challenges she had overcome. The military insignia embedded throughout the design told a story of service, sacrifice, and brotherhood that had shaped who she was as a person. But these 3 students saw none of that meaning or significance. To them, it was probably just another tattoo that someone had gotten because they thought it looked cool. They had no way of knowing the real story behind the artwork or the experiences that had inspired every element of the design. Their assumptions and judgments were based on nothing more than their own limited understanding of what military service really meant. Sarah took a deep breath and tried to refocus on her laptop screen. She was writing about the importance of understanding trauma and how quick judgments could hurt people who were already struggling with difficult memories. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. Here she was studying how to help people heal from emotional wounds while 3 strangers were unknowingly creating new ones with their thoughtless comments. The coffee shop was busier than usual for a Tuesday morning. Students hurried in and out between classes, grabbing quick coffee fixes and breakfast sandwiches. Business people in suits checked their phones while waiting for their orders. A few elderly regulars sat reading newspapers and chatting quietly about local news. Most people minded their own business and created a pleasant background buzz of normal daily life. But the three students at the next table seemed determined to make themselves heard. Their whispers had grown into quiet conversations that Sarah could no longer ignore. She realized they wanted her to hear their comments about her tattoo. They were performing for each other, but also directing their show toward her. The morning that had started so peacefully was turning into something much more difficult and painful. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment and remembered why she had gotten the tattoo in the first place. It was not about looking tough or trying to impress anyone. It was about honoring people who had meant everything to her and experiences that had changed her life forever. The artwork on her skin told a story of courage, love, loss, and survival that these young people could never understand without walking in her shoes. She opened her eyes and looked directly at her laptop screen, determined not to let their ignorance ruin her morning or her important work. The boy in the expensive hoodie stopped pretending to whisper. His voice carried across the small space between their tables with cruel clarity. "Look at that girl trying to be all tough with her fake military tattoo," he said, loud enough for Sarah and several other customers to hear. She probably got it because she thought it looked cool in some magazine or movie. His two friends immediately joined in with enthusiastic agreement. The blond boy put down his phone and leaned forward with a mean smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, totally fake," he said with a laugh. "These wannabes make me sick. They have no idea what real military service is about, but they want all the credit and respect." The red-haired girl stopped taking selfies and focused her attention on Sarah for the first time. "Oh my God, you are so right," she said in a high-pitched voice that sounded like she was gossiping about celebrity drama. "That tattoo is probably supposed to make people think she is some kind of war hero or something." How embarrassing for her. Sarah felt her hands begin to tremble as she gripped her coffee cup tighter. The warm ceramic mug had been comforting just moments before, but now it felt like the only solid thing keeping her grounded. She had heard comments like these before in different places and situations. Grocery stores, gas stations, restaurants, and even at the university where she was studying. But hearing the mockery never got easier, no matter how many times it happened. The tattoo on her arm seemed to burn under their staring eyes and harsh words. Every detail that meant so much to her was being reduced to nothing more than a fashion statement or attention-seeking behavior. The eagle that represented freedom and strength was being called fake. The waves that symbolized all the storms she had weathered were being dismissed as meaningless decoration. The military insignia that honored people she loved and lost were being treated like costume jewelry. "I bet she tells people thank you for your service." "Stories," the boy in the hoodie continued, with growing confidence. His friends were laughing and encouraging him, which seemed to make him feel like he was performing comedy instead of being cruel to a stranger. She probably practices her fake war stories in the mirror at home. Other customers in Brewhaven were starting to notice the loud conversation. An older businessman looked up from his newspaper with a frown of disapproval. A young mother with her baby stroller glanced over nervously, then moved to a table further away from the disturbance. Two baristas behind the counter exchanged worried looks but seemed unsure about whether they should intervene in a customer dispute. Sarah tried desperately to focus on her laptop screen where her thesis about trauma counseling waited for her attention. The document was filled with research about how verbal attacks and public humiliation could trigger painful memories in people who had already survived difficult experiences. She was studying the exact type of emotional damage that was being inflicted on her right now by these three thoughtless students. The irony was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Here she was dedicating her graduate education and future career to helping veterans and trauma survivors heal from psychological wounds. She wanted to create safe spaces where people could process their experiences without judgment or ridicule. Yet she was sitting in her own safe space being attacked by people who had no understanding of what they were doing to her. "What do you think her fake rank was?" the red-haired girl asked with mock curiosity. "Lieutenant Colonel Sarah? General Martinez? Oh wait, maybe she was a Navy SEAL because that tattoo has water in it." All three students burst into loud laughter that echoed through the coffee shop and made other customers shift uncomfortably. In their seats, the blond boy wiped tears of laughter from his eyes and added his own cruel observation. "Stolen valor much? Real veterans would be totally disgusted by posers like her. She is disrespecting everyone who actually served their country by pretending to be something she is not." Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall where these students could see them. She had learned long ago that showing emotion in situations like this only made things worse. People who enjoyed hurting others often became more excited when they saw they were succeeding in causing pain. The morning sunlight that had seemed so welcoming when she first arrived now felt harsh and exposing. Every ray seemed to highlight her tattoo and draw more attention to the artwork that was supposed to honor sacred memories. The comfortable corner table that usually felt like protection now felt like a trap where she was surrounded by hostile voices. Sarah thought about all the time she had sat in this exact spot working on her research and remembering good times from her past. She had written dozens of pages about resilience and recovery, while drinking coffee and watching the peaceful flow of daily life through the large windows. This coffee shop had become her refuge from a world that often felt challenging and unpredictable. But now these 3 students were poisoning her sanctuary with their ignorance and cruelty. They were taking away the one place where she had felt completely safe and comfortable. The familiar sounds of grinding coffee beans and steaming milk were being drowned out by their harsh laughter and mean-spirited comments. "I wonder what her story is," the boy in the hoodie said with false concern in his voice. Did she watch too many action movies? Did she date a soldier once and think that made her special? Or maybe she just wanted people to buy her drinks at bars by pretending to be a veteran. The attacks were becoming more personal and more vicious with each comment. What had started as thoughtless remarks about her tattoo was turning into a full-scale character assassination based on nothing but their own assumptions and prejudices. They were creating an entire false narrative about who she was and what motivated her choices. Sarah realized that no matter how hard she tried to ignore them, the situation was only getting worse. These students were feeding off each other's energy and growing bolder with each laugh they shared. They had turned her into their entertainment for the morning and showed no signs of stopping their cruel performance. Sarah had reached her breaking point. The cruel comments and laughter had been going on for 15 minutes and showed no signs of stopping. Her peaceful morning had turned into a nightmare of public humiliation, and she could not take it anymore. She slowly closed her laptop and turned in her chair to face the 3 students directly. "Excuse me," Sarah said in a voice that was steady and calm despite the storm of emotions raging inside her chest. "You don't know anything about me or my tattoo. Maybe you should mind your own business and let other people enjoy their coffee in peace." The entire coffee shop seemed to freeze in that moment. Conversations at other tables stopped mid-sentence as customers turned to watch what was happening. The baristas behind the counter paused their work and looked over with worried expressions. Even the soft jazz music playing through the speakers seemed quieter, as if the whole building was holding its breath. The boy in the expensive hoodie appeared genuinely surprised that Sarah had spoken up. He had probably expected her to sit quietly and endure their abuse without fighting back. His mouth hung open for a few seconds before a slow, mean smile spread across his face. He stood up from his chair, making himself look taller and more intimidating. "Oh, wow. So now the fake soldier wants to act all tough and scary," he said with exaggerated shock in his voice. "Look, everyone, the pretend veteran is getting angry. Because we figured out her little game." His friends burst into fresh laughter as if this was the funniest thing they had ever witnessed. The red-haired girl pulled out her phone and started recording the confrontation. "This is going to be so good for social media," she whispered to the blonde boy. "Fake military girl having a total meltdown in public." The idea that they might post this encounter online for thousands of strangers to mock made Sarah feel sick to her stomach. "Did you get that tattoo at some strip mall parlor between a nail salon and a pizza place?" The boy continued with growing confidence from his friend's support. "What's next are you going to tell us? Amazing war stories that you read on Wikipedia or saw in a movie last weekend?" His 2 friends erupted in even louder laughter that echoed through the coffee shop like breaking glass. Other customers began to look genuinely uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them. A few people gathered their belongings and left the shop entirely rather than watch the cruel spectacle continue. Sarah felt her face flush red with a mixture of anger, hurt, and embarrassment. She had dedicated years of her life to serving others in ways these spoiled college students would never understand or appreciate. Her tattoo represented real sacrifices, real losses, and real brotherhood that had been forged through shared hardship and danger. The artwork on her arm told the story of people who had given everything For their country and their fellow service members. Every line and color had been chosen to honor memories that were sacred to her. The eagle soaring above the waves represented the freedom that so many had died to protect. The military insignia woven throughout the design were symbols of units that had become her family when she had no one else. "You want to know about my tattoo?" Sarah said with quiet dignity that cut through their laughter like a knife. "Every single detail means something important to me. This isn't some fashion statement or cry for attention. This is about honoring people who deserved better than they got from this world." But the three students were too caught up in their own performance to hear the pain and sincerity in her voice. The boy in the hoodie stepped closer to her table, invading her personal space, in a way that made her feel threatened and trapped. "Oh, please spare us the fake emotional speech," he said with mock sympathy dripping from every word. "We have all heard this act before from attention seekers like you. Next, you're going to tell us about your fake PTSD and how hard it is to adjust to civilian life." The mention of PTSD hit Sarah like a physical blow. These students had no idea how close to home their cruel guesses were hitting. They were mocking real struggles that millions of veterans faced every single day. Mental health challenges were not jokes or material for their entertainment. Sarah stood up from her chair slowly and deliberately. She was not as tall as the boy in the hoodie, but something in her posture and bearing made him take an involuntary step backward. There was a strength and presence about her that could not be faked or learned from movies. "You need to stop right now," she said in a voice that carried quiet authority. "You are making other customers uncomfortable, and you are way out of line with your comments about things you don't understand." The blond boy jumped up to support, his friend creating what felt like a small mob surrounding Sarah's corner table. "Who do you think you are telling us what to do?" he demanded with false bravado. "This is a public place and we can say whatever we want about obvious fakes and posers." An elderly man at a nearby table cleared his throat loudly and spoke up for the first time. "Young people, you should listen to the lady and leave her alone," he said in a voice that carried the weight of many years. "Your behavior is inappropriate and disrespectful." But the three students ignored his wise advice completely. They were too invested in their cruel game to back down now. The red-haired girl kept recording everything on her phone, hoping to capture Sarah losing her temper or breaking down in tears. Sarah realized that reasoning with these people was impossible. They had made up their minds about who she was based on nothing but their own ignorance and prejudice. No amount of explanation or pleading would change their attitudes or make them see her as a real person with real feelings. She sat back down and reopened her laptop, determined not to let them drive her away from the coffee shop that had become her second home. This was her place of peace and healing, and she would not surrender it to three bullies who had nothing better to do than hurt strangers for their own amusement. The silver bell above the coffee shop door chimed, softly as someone new entered Brew Haven. Sarah was still sitting at her corner table trying to focus on her laptop while the three college students continued their cruel performance. The sound of the door opening barely registered in her mind because she was working so hard to block out their ongoing comments and laughter. But something about the new arrival caught the attention of several customers near the front of the shop. The person who had just walked in carried himself with a bearing that was impossible to ignore. His footsteps were measured and confident, creating a rhythm that seemed different from the casual shuffle of college students and business people who usually frequented the coffee shop. Commander Jake Morrison stepped through the doorway and paused for just a moment to scan the room. 22 years of military service had trained him to automatically assess any new environment he entered. His sharp eyes took in the layout of the shop, the positions of all the customers, and the general atmosphere of the place within seconds. He wore his dress blue navy uniform with crisp precision that spoke of decades of discipline and attention to detail. The dark blue fabric was perfectly pressed without a single wrinkle or imperfection. Golden buttons caught the morning sunlight streaming through the windows and reflected small dancing spots of light on the nearby walls. His white hat sat at exactly the correct angle, according to military regulations that had become second nature to him. The white uniform jacket displayed an impressive array of ribbons and medals, arranged in perfect rows across his chest. Each colorful ribbon told a story of service, sacrifice, and achievement that spanned over 2 decades. There were ribbons for overseas deployments, combat operations, humanitarian missions, and special commendations that few people would ever have the opportunity To earn, his broad shoulders carried the weight of responsibility and leadership that came with commanding elite Navy SEAL teams in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. At 44 years old, Commander Morrison had seen and done things that most people could only imagine from movies or books. But despite all his experiences and accomplishments, he remained humble and dedicated to serving others. Commander Morrison had just finished an important meeting at the local military recruiting office where he had been discussing new training programs for young sailors. The meeting had run longer than expected, and now he was running behind schedule for his next appointment. He had planned to grab a quick coffee and maybe a breakfast sandwich before heading home to spend time with his wife and 2 teenage children. As he approached the counter to place his order, his trained ears picked up the sound of raised voices coming from the back corner of the shop. Years of combat experience had made him extremely sensitive to signs of conflict or distress. Even in peaceful civilian settings, he automatically monitored the emotional temperature of any room he entered. The 3 college students were still taunting Sarah with increasing boldness and volume. Their voices carried clearly across the coffee shop as they continued their cruel game of mocking someone they knew nothing about. Commander Morrison could hear fragments of their conversation that made him pause and listen more carefully. Fake military tattoo, stolen valor, wannabe soldier, pretending to be a veteran. The words hit Commander Morrison like physical blows. As someone who had dedicated his entire adult life to military service, he took accusations of stolen valor very seriously. Men and women had died to earn the respect and recognition that came with military service. Anyone who falsely claimed to be a veteran was committing a serious offense against every person who had ever worn the uniform. But something about the situation did not feel right to him. The voice of the person being accused sounded calm and dignified rather than defensive or guilty. Real stolen valor cases usually involve people who became angry or made wild claims when confronted. This situation seemed different somehow. Commander Morrison changed his path toward the counter and began walking slowly toward the back corner where the confrontation was taking place. His military bearing and obvious rank caused several customers to step aside and watch him with curious respect. The baristas behind the counter noticed his approach and whispered to each other about the impressive-looking officer who had just entered their shop. As he got closer to Sarah's table, Commander Morrison was able to see the tattoo that had triggered all the cruel comments from the college students. His experienced eyes immediately began analyzing the artwork with the sharp attention to detail that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. The tattoo was not some random collection of military symbols thrown together by someone trying to look tough. Every element appeared to have been carefully chosen and placed with specific meaning and purpose. The eagle soaring above rolling waves was rendered with artistic skill and attention to detail that suggested deep personal significance rather than casual fashion choice, but it was the military insignia woven throughout the design that really caught Commander Morrison's attention. His pulse quickened as he recognized symbols and markings that were not commonly known outside of very specific military units. These were not generic Army, Navy, or Air Force symbols that anyone could find online or in a tattoo parlor reference book. The insignia belonged to a Special Operations Medical Unit that had worked closely with his own SEAL teams during several joint missions overseas. Commander Morrison knew those symbols because he had helped design some of them during planning sessions for complex operations that required the highest levels of security, clearance, and specialized training. Only someone who had actually served with that particular unit would know the exact combination of eagle's waves and insignia that decorated Sarah's arm. The tattoo was not just authentic military artwork, it was a very specific tribute to a very elite group of people who had earned the right to wear those symbols. Through blood, sweat, and sacrifice, Commander Morrison felt his respect for the unknown woman grow with each detail he observed. This was not stolen valor. This was genuine honor being displayed by someone who had clearly earned the right to wear those markings. The college students had no idea they were mocking a real veteran who had probably seen more action and danger than they could imagine. Commander Morrison moved closer to Sarah's table, studying every detail of her tattoo with the intensity of someone reading a secret code. His trained eyes traced the intricate design mapping each symbol and insignia against his memory of classified operations and elite military units. What he discovered made his heart rate increase and his respect for this unknown woman grow exponentially. The eagle in the center of the tattoo was not just any military bird symbol. The specific way its wings were positioned and the detailed feathers around its head matched exactly the design used by the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Commander Morrison had flown with those pilots during some of the most dangerous missions of his career. Only people who had worked directly with that unit would know those precise artistic details. The waves beneath the eagle were rendered in a very particular style that told another part of the story. The way the water curved and flowed matched the insignia used by Naval Special Warfare units during joint operations with Army Special Forces medical teams. Commander Morrison recognized those wave patterns because he had helped create them during planning sessions for missions that required the highest levels of security clearance, but it was the small medical cross hidden within the design that confirmed everything for Commander Morrison. The cross was barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look for it. The symbol was positioned in a way that honored combat medics who had served with special operations teams in Afghanistan and Iraq. This was not random tattoo art. This was a tribute to fallen heroes who had given their lives to save others. Commander Morrison's memory suddenly clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle coming together. He remembered a female medic who had worked with his team during a particularly dangerous mission outside Kandahar 3 years ago. The operation had gone wrong when their convoy was ambushed by enemy forces in a narrow mountain pass. 2 of his SEAL team members had been critically wounded by improvised explosive devices. The Army medic who had saved those men had been fearless under fire, crawling through active combat zones to reach the wounded soldiers. She had performed emergency medical procedures while bullets flew overhead and explosions shook the ground beneath them. Her quick thinking and expert medical training had kept both SEALs alive long enough for them to be evacuated to a field hospital. Commander Morrison remembered how impressed he had been with her calm professionalism during the chaos of combat. While experienced soldiers were taking cover and calling for backup, she had focused entirely on saving lives without any regard for her own safety. Her actions that day had earned her the respect of every member of his SEAL team. The female medic had been recommended for a Bronze Star with Valor for her heroic actions during that ambush. Commander Morrison had personally written part of the recommendation letter, describing how her courage and skill had saved American lives under the most dangerous possible circumstances. He remembered her name now, Sergeant Sarah Martinez from the 28th Combat Support Hospital, attached to Special Operations Command. Looking at Sarah sitting quietly at her corner table, Commander Morrison felt a surge of anger at the 3 college students who were still mocking her service and sacrifice. These spoiled kids had no idea they were insulting a genuine war hero who had risked everything to save others. Their ignorant comments about stolen valor were not just wrong, they were insulting to every person who had ever worn the uniform with honor. The boy in the expensive hoodie was still performing for his friends, completely unaware that a senior military officer was standing just a few feet away listening to every cruel word. "I bet she tells everyone she was a Navy SEAL," he said with a laugh. "Or maybe she claims she was some kind of Special Forces super soldier who saved the world." His friends continued to encourage him with their laughter and additional mean comments. The red-haired girl was still recording everything on her phone, hoping to capture Sarah breaking down or losing her temper. They had turned cruelty into entertainment without any thought about the real person they were hurting. Commander Morrison had heard enough. These students were not just being rude or inconsiderate, they were committing a serious offense against someone who had earned the highest respect. As a senior officer, he had a duty to protect the honor and dignity of all service members, especially those who had distinguished themselves in combat. He took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders, preparing to intervene in a situation that had gone far beyond acceptable behavior. Commander Morrison's presence in his dress blue uniform would immediately change the dynamic of the confrontation. His rank and obvious authority would force everyone in the coffee shop to pay attention to what he had to say. But more importantly, his intervention would provide Sarah with the recognition and respect she deserved from someone who actually understood what her service meant. Commander Morrison knew that having a fellow veteran acknowledge her sacrifice would mean more to her than anything else in the world. The 3 college students had no idea that their cruel game was about to come to an abrupt end. They were so caught up in their own performance that they had not even noticed the impressive military officer who had been observing their behavior with growing disapproval. Their laughter and mockery were about to be replaced with embarrassment and shame. Commander Morrison began walking directly toward Sarah's table with the confident stride of someone who had commanded respect in the most dangerous places on Earth. His military bearing and obvious authority caused other customers to turn and watch as he approached. The source of all the commotion, the silver eagles on his uniform collar, caught the morning sunlight as he moved, creating small flashes of light that seemed to announce his arrival. His ribbons and medals told their own story of courage and dedication that would soon put the students' ignorant comments into proper perspective. Sarah was still trying to focus on her laptop screen when she became aware of someone approaching her table. She looked up, expecting to see a barista or perhaps another customer who wanted to complain about the noise. Instead, she found herself looking at a senior Navy officer in full-dress uniform, who was walking directly toward her with obvious purpose and determination. Commander Morrison stopped directly in front of Sarah's table, and the entire coffee shop fell into complete silence. The three college students who had been laughing and making cruel comments just seconds before suddenly found themselves face to face with a senior military officer whose presence commanded immediate respect and attention. Their voices died in their throats as they stared up at his impressive uniform and stern expression. Without any hesitation or doubt, Commander Morrison brought his right hand up to his forehead in the sharpest, most precise military salute that anyone in Brewhaven had ever witnessed. His arm moved with the fluid grace of someone who had performed this gesture thousands of times in honor of fallen heroes and distinguished service members. The salute was crisp, professional, and filled with genuine respect that could not be faked or misunderstood. "Ma'am," Commander Morrison said in a clear, strong voice that carried across the now silent coffee shop with unmistakable authority. The single word contained more respect and recognition than all the cruel comments from the college students combined. His tone conveyed honored dignity and the brotherhood that existed between people who had served their country with distinction. Sarah's eyes immediately filled with tears as she recognized what was happening. After months of dealing with judgment, mockery, and misunderstanding from people who knew nothing about her service, she was finally being acknowledged by someone who understood. The simple gesture of respect from a fellow veteran meant more to her than any medal or certificate ever could. She stood up from her chair with the same military bearing and precision that had been drilled into her during years of training and service. Despite the tears in her eyes, her posture was straight and proud as she returned Commander Morrison's salute with equal sharpness and respect. The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but it spoke volumes to anyone who understood military protocol and tradition. The three college students sat frozen in their chairs, completely shocked by what they were witnessing. The boy in the expensive hoodie looked like he had been slapped across the face. His mouth hung open and his eyes darted back and forth between Sarah and Commander Morrison as his brain tried to process what was happening before him. The red-haired girl stopped recording on her phone and slowly lowered it to the table. The confident smirk that had been on her face just moments before was replaced by confusion and growing embarrassment. She began to realize that everything they had assumed about Sarah might be completely wrong. The blond boy who had been making jokes about stolen valor now looked pale and sick to his stomach. He was starting to understand that they had been mocking a real veteran in front of a senior military officer who clearly knew and respected her. The cruel entertainment that had seemed so funny just minutes ago was turning into a nightmare of shame and humiliation. Other customers in the coffee shop watched the scene unfold with fascination and respect. The elderly man who had tried to defend Sarah earlier nodded his approval at Commander Morrison's intervention. The young mother with the baby stroller moved closer to get a better view of what was clearly an important moment. Even the baristas behind the counter stopped working to observe the powerful exchange taking place. Commander Morrison then did something that surprised everyone, including Sarah. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone, opening it to a specific photo that he had saved in his military memories folder. The image on the screen showed his SEAL team from 3 years ago standing together with members of Sarah's former medical unit during a brief break between combat operations. "I remember you, Sergeant Martinez," Commander Morrison said with warmth and recognition filling his voice. "You saved 2 of my men during that ambush outside Kandahar in the Kunar province. Your quick thinking and medical training kept petty Officer Johnson and Petty Officer Williams alive until we could get them to the field hospital. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the memories came flooding back. That mission had been one of the most intense and dangerous experiences of her military career. The convoy had been hit by a coordinated ambush with improvised explosive devices, rocket-propelled grenades, and small arms fire coming from multiple directions. The chaos and violence had been overwhelming even for experienced combat veterans. She remembered crawling through the dust and debris to reach the wounded SEALs while bullets whistled overhead and explosions shook the ground beneath her. Both men had suffered severe injuries that required immediate medical attention to prevent them from bleeding to death. Sarah had worked on them for over an hour under constant enemy fire, performing emergency surgery with basic field equipment. Petty Officer Johnson lost his left leg below the knee, but he survived and eventually returned to limited duty. Commander Morrison continued as other customers leaned in to hear every word. Petty Officer Williams had massive internal bleeding from shrapnel wounds, but your field surgery saved his life. He made a full recovery and is still serving with my team today. The coffee shop remained completely silent as Commander Morrison shared the details of Sarah's heroic actions with everyone present. The 3 college students who had been making jokes about fake war stories were now hearing about real combat from someone who had been there and witnessed Sarah's courage firsthand. You were recommended for a Bronze Star with Valor for your actions that day, Commander Morrison said with obvious pride in his voice. I personally wrote part of the recommendation letter describing how your bravery and medical expertise saved American lives under the most dangerous possible circumstances. You crawled through active combat to reach wounded soldiers without any regard for your own safety. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she listened to Commander Morrison recount the mission that had changed her life forever. She had rarely talked about her combat experiences with anyone because most people could not understand what military service really involved. But hearing her actions described by someone who had been there and understood their significance felt like a tremendous weight being lifted from her shoulders. The truth about Sarah's service was now clear to everyone in Brewhaven Coffee Shop. The woman they had been watching get mocked and ridiculed was actually a decorated combat veteran who had risked her life to save others. Her tattoo was not a fake fashion statement, but a genuine tribute to the brotherhood and sacrifice that defined military service at its highest level. The silence in Brewhaven Coffee Shop stretched on for what felt like an eternity, as the full weight of the truth settled over everyone present. The 3 college students sat frozen in their chairs, their faces burning red with shame and embarrassment. They had been caught in the act of mocking a genuine war hero by someone whose authority and knowledge could not be questioned or dismissed. Commander Morrison slowly turned his attention away from Sarah and fixed his steady gaze on the 3 students who had been causing all the trouble. His expression was calm and controlled, but there was an unmistakable edge of steel in his eyes that made all 3 young people shrink back in their seats. 22 years of commanding elite military units had taught him how to project authority without raising his voice or making threats. This woman is a hero who risked her life to save others, Commander Morrison said in a voice that was quiet, but carried clearly to every corner of the coffee shop. Her tattoo honors teammates who didn't come home and represents sacrifices that you clearly cannot begin to understand or appreciate. The boy in the expensive hoodie tried to speak but only managed to produce a weak croaking sound. His confidence and arrogance had completely evaporated in the face of Commander Morrison's calm authority and the undeniable truth about Sarah's service. All of his cruel jokes and mean-spirited comments now seemed petty and ignorant beyond belief. Before you mock someone's military service, you might want to learn what real sacrifice actually looks like. Commander Morrison continued with the same steady tone that he used to brief his SEAL teams before dangerous missions. The symbols on Sergeant Martinez's tattoo represent units that have lost good people in combat. Her artwork honors the memory of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who gave their lives for this country. The red-haired girl was now crying quietly as the reality of their behavior hit her like a physical blow. She had been recording Sarah's humiliation on her phone, planning to post it on social media for entertainment. Now she realized that she had been documenting her own cruel treatment of someone who deserved nothing but respect and gratitude. The blonde boy who had made jokes about stolen valor looked like he wanted to disappear completely. His face was pale and his hands were shaking as he understood that he had been accusing a real combat veteran of pretending to be something she actually was. The irony and injustice of the situation was overwhelming. Commander Morrison paused for a moment to let his words sink in before delivering his final statement to the 3 students. Sergeant Martinez crawled through enemy fire to save wounded Americans, while you were probably safe in your dorm rooms, complaining about homework assignments. She earned every symbol on that tattoo through blood, sweat, and courage that you will hopefully never have to experience. The entire coffee shop remained completely silent as other customers absorbed the powerful lesson being delivered before them. Several people were wiping tears from their eyes as they realized they had witnessed something much more significant than a simple confrontation between strangers. They had seen real military honor and brotherhood in action. The 3 college students finally found their voices and began mumbling weak apologies that sounded hollow and inadequate after everything that had happened. "We're sorry, we didn't know, we thought," the boy in the hoodie stammered without being able to complete a coherent sentence. But their apologies rang false and meaningless after the extended period of cruelty they had inflicted on Sarah. Commander Morrison's expression made it clear that sorry was not nearly enough to make up for their behavior. They had revealed something ugly about their characters that could not be easily forgiven or forgotten. "You need to leave now," Commander Morrison said, in a tone that left no room for argument or discussion. "Sergeant Martinez came here for peace and quiet, and you have disrupted that long enough. Take your ignorance and cruelty somewhere else." The 3 students gathered their belongings with shaking hands and hurried toward the exit without looking back at Sarah or Commander Morrison. Their confident swagger from earlier in the morning had been replaced by hunched shoulders and downcast eyes. They slipped out the door like shadows eager to escape the scene of their humiliation. As soon as the troublemakers were gone, the atmosphere in Brew Haven completely transformed. Other customers began approaching Sarah's table to thank her for her service and apologize for not speaking up sooner. The elderly man who had tried to defend her earlier shook her hand with obvious respect and gratitude. The young mother with the baby stroller stopped by to express her appreciation for Sarah's sacrifices. Even the baristas came out from behind the counter to meet the war hero who had been sitting quietly in their shop for months without anyone knowing her incredible story. Commander Morrison sat down at Sarah's table, and they spent the next hour sharing stories and catching up on mutual friends from their deployment. Sarah learned that both of the SEALs she had saved were doing well and continuing their military careers. Hearing about their recovery and success meant more to her than any medal or recognition ever could. They talked about the challenges of adjusting to civilian life and the difficulty of helping people understand what military service really involved. Commander Morrison shared his own experiences with judgment and misunderstanding from people who had never worn the uniform. Their conversation was healing for both of them. As their time together came to an end, Commander Morrison stood up and saluted Sarah once more. This second salute was witnessed by a coffee shop full of people who now understood its significance and meaning. The gesture received respectful silence and appreciation from everyone present. When Commander Morrison finally left, Brew Haven Sarah felt a profound sense of peace and validation that she had not experienced in months. The coffee shop had been transformed from a place of pain and humiliation back into the sanctuary she had always loved. Her tattoo no longer felt like a target for mockery, but rather a badge of honor that connected her to a brotherhood of service and sacrifice. Sarah reopened her laptop and returned to her thesis about helping veterans heal from trauma. The morning had given her new insights about the importance of recognition and understanding in the healing process. She would use this experience to help others who faced similar challenges and judgments in their own lives.